This is a 335-page report, and it is critical on every level.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the U.S. Coast Guard's latest report into the 2023 Titan submersible implosion and whether the disaster was preventable.
The mini-sub, called the Titan, vanished an hour and 45 minutes into its 4-kilometer plunge.
Regulatory confusion.
Before this incident, there really was no regulatory framework, both on the domestic or international level, among maritime agencies.
One of the things the Coast Guard wanted to clarify was why regulators didn't intervene and whether there are places regulations could be improved to prevent something like this from happening again. It turns out that the answer to that question is yes and no. They did identify places where better regulations could be in place going forward, but also determined that Oceangate frustrated regulators on purpose.
The term mission specialist is a workaround. There are some rules about operating vessels at sea. Those rules differ depending on whether you are a crew member or you're a paying passenger.
The report notes in its opening summary, and we quote, "By strategically creating and exploiting regulatory confusion and oversight challenges, Oceangate was ultimately able to operate Titan completely outside of the established deep-sea protocol," end quote. Avoiding regulation was the company's entire goal.
Stockton was trying to confuse that, insisting that nobody was ever referred to as a passenger.
OSHA's missed opportunity.
Unfortunately, whistleblowers, they're not protected from retaliation. We're not like the, witness protection program or something like that. What we do is investigate.
Not only did Oceangate want to avoid regulators, but it was successful in doing so. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the U.S., was given a complaint in February 2018 from ex-employee David Lockridge. And while OSHA did attempt to refer this to the U.S. Coast Guard, communication was poor and a real investigation was not launched.
And as you can imagine, a lawsuit is no easy thing, especially when you're being threatened with theft, fraud.
Because of this, the regulators who were meant to be responsible for preventing things like this, though crucially nothing like this had ever happened before, didn't coordinate with each other and didn't investigate Oceangate, despite whistleblowers trying to save lives. The reason for this? A backlog of cases at OSHA.
Please note that at this time, I have 11 cases that are older than yours. I will be in contact with you as needed. Thank you for your patience.
Money was more important.
This was a company that was in financial loss, so a great deal of intimidation tactics, we understand, were used as well.
In the lead-up to the fatal Dive 88, Oceangate's financial situation was growing more and more tenuous. Adverse weather and issues with Titan regularly led to expeditions being canceled or delayed for as long as a year, waiting for the following summer, which led to many paying quote-unquote mission specialists demanding refunds. The company did not issue these refunds and also did not disclose that Titan had any problems, misrepresenting how safe it was.
That was not public knowledge, and they said, do not say anything to anyone.
Why? Money, obviously. Mission specialists also weren't shown that infamous waiver until after they'd already paid, and sometimes not until the dive was about to be carried out. According to the Coast Guard, this was, quote, intentional to pressure them into signing.
The team always says, there's no guarantee you're going to see the bow, there's no guarantee you're going to get down there, because there's so many variables.
Safety protocols weren't followed.
That day, Stockton told me it would be nothing for him to spend $50,000 to ruin somebody's life.
We're not talking about normal safety protocols as any properly classed and registered vehicle has to follow, which Oceangate obviously ignored. We're talking about the company's own internal safety protocols, which also weren't followed. This was described by the Coast Guard report as a toxic safety culture.
The Coast Guard now says Oceangate's Titan submersible implosion was preventable. The Guard's final report on the tragedy says CEO Stockton Rush was warned many times about how dangerous his submersible was, and not only ignored the warnings, but threatened anyone who raised concerns.
The report says that employees within Oceangate were belittled for raising issues. Many documentaries released in the aftermath have featured interviews with former employees, many of whom were fired, like David Lockridge, or quit, like Emily Hammermeister and Bonnie Carl.
It's culture that caused this to happen. It's culture that killed the people. 100%.
In one chilling example cited by the Coast Guard, the reason Titan used only 4 bolts to attach the dome was that it was quicker. That's despite the design requiring 18.
And I was not going to bolt anyone inside of that sub. And that was something that a lot of my coworkers at the time agreed on, and none of which stayed with the company much longer.
Inexperienced employees.
I had to make sure that nobody spoke up. I worked for somebody that is probably borderline clinical psychopath, but definitely a narcissist.
The result of the nonstop firings and departures of experienced employees was that Oceangate ended up being staffed by young, inexperienced engineers. That's not to say they weren't knowledgeable, competent, or good at their jobs, but you can't buy experience. And anybody who objected to Rush's company-wide decisions found themselves on the chopping block.
He had said, we want you to be a female young pilot. We want you to be the face of the company.
This is again related to the toxic safety culture, since even when those young engineers and professionals did point out safety problems, which many did, let's not forget, they were fired or forced out.
I did speak up. A lot of people did. They discussed their concerns. They're like, what do you mean? This failed. You're going to keep going?
The ones left were stuck choosing between either keeping their careers or potentially sabotaging themselves, since Rush also threatened to blackball people who went against him. The delays.
Sam, the report also finds that the team didn't notify anyone of a problem for more than 7 hours. Are they offering any explanation for that?
That's another one of the big questions. Why didn't anyone say anything?
At 10:47 a.m., the Coast Guard says the implosion happened, with the sound traveling all the way through the ocean to the support staff on Polar Prince. Yes, that bang heard in the clip of Wendy Rush reacting didn't come through the equipment, they heard it from the outside.
Yeah, it should be about 500 meters, 30. What was that bang?
But the Coast Guard wasn't notified until 7:10 p.m., over 8 hours later. This was after Polar Prince had spent hours conducting grid searches for the Titan, waiting for it to surface. Now, even if the Coast Guard had been notified immediately, it obviously couldn't have saved anyone. The implosion killed the passengers instantly. But the wreck likely could have been located sooner had the crew realized what must have happened.
The Titan carries 96 hours worth of oxygen, and a third of that is now gone. They may have as little as 60 hours before breathing becomes impossible.
Transportation costs.
This vessel was made with carbon fiber. It is a cheaper material, but to describe the carbon fiber, essentially you're looking at, if I could describe to it as a number of hairs.
The big question about Titan has always been, why carbon fiber? Why use an untested material that can catastrophically fail in exactly the situation Oceangate used it in? Well, with the Coast Guard report, it looks like we finally have our answer. The lighter Titan is, the cheaper it is to transport. Yes, Stockton himself made a big deal out of how light carbon fiber is for deep-sea operations, but the real reason was, unsurprisingly, cost-cutting.
Do you have any questions about what's going on, about acoustic monitoring, about carbon fiber problems we had, rumors of problems we had, actual problems we had?
According to the report, while Rush did also believe that a lighter vessel would have better buoyancy, the cheaper shipping costs were a key factor. It's easy to see why, considering Oceangate was based in Washington, but conducted its operations from St. John's in Newfoundland.
The report found the Titan's carbon fiber design was fundamentally flawed. Oceangate failed to follow established engineering protocols for safety and testing.
The parking lot.
This report also says Oceangate failed to conduct proper maintenance or even protect the Titan from the elements. How do you do that if you're sending something so deep into the water?
Despite pinching pennies over Titan's weight, Stockton still didn't bother to bring Titan back to Washington from Eastern Canada in the winter of 2022 to 2023. He didn't even bother to store it properly in Newfoundland, instead leaving it outdoors in a parking lot in St. John's. We already knew about this, but the report goes into detail about how Oceangate reached this decision, and yes, it's because storing it improperly was cheaper. According to the Coast Guard, the quote given to Oceangate to cover Titan was $1,750. Almost nothing, relatively speaking.
If water gets in there, and you sit it out in freezing conditions and that water expands, it breaks fibers.
The reason for all this was a dispute between Oceangate and the Memorial University of Newfoundland, because Oceangate was trying to demand certain tax exemptions from the university.
100% certainty, that sub could not go freezing. It's critical to keep the water out.
Towing. Something that hadn't been talked about as much before the report was the way Oceangate chose to transport Titan once it was at sea.
Here's how the launch is supposed to go. The sub is attached to a huge floating platform. Motorboats drag it down the big orange ramp into the sea.
Images from before the disaster show Titan being towed behind Polar Prince aboard a platform, which is officially called the Launch and Recovery System, or LARS. But questions were raised by the Coast Guard about why this was done at all, when it would have been possible for Oceangate to charter a ship that was already outfitted to carry a submersible on deck.
The platform submerges to around 30 feet, where the water is much calmer than on the surface.
Towing was actually dangerous, because not only did it mean people couldn't often access Titan, but also, earlier in 2023, the tow line got caught in Polar Prince's propellers. We still don't really know why this was done.
At this point, divers are supposed to detach the sub from its launch platform.
So apparently those floats there came off the platform, and that wasn't supposed to happen.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. It was the hull.
Let's just see how she settles down, but that's a lot of events.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Okay.
We've known from the moment the sub disappeared that the carbon fiber hull was almost definitely the cause of this catastrophic failure. Thanks to the Coast Guard's investigation, which involved a forensic examination of the recovered wreck, we now know that this was correct. The hull did fail. Worse, the real-time monitoring system, or RTM, Oceangate used did report many anomalies and events ahead of Dive 88 that indicated a failure, but these were simply ignored.
So the good news is we started to see evidence of failure before it happened, which is one of the test objectives.
The Coast Guard points this out. The RTM worked, it did measure a delamination acoustically, and had this been heated and the hull repaired or replaced, the implosion that June could have been avoided.
I would say that was it.
Should I stop now?
Yeah, I think so.
Let us know in the comments whether you'll be reading the U.S. Coast Guard report into the implosion.
Had he survived, he would have likely faced criminal charges, including 4 counts of manslaughter.